Hi, I'm Jonathan Fields, and this is Good Life Project. So my guest today is Rich Roll, who owns the title of Fittest Man in the World, and he's the author of a really good book called Finding Ultra. We're going to kind of go into his journey because this wasn't always his existence. So awesome to be hanging out with you today.
Yeah, thanks for having me. It's great to be here.
Yeah, so you are now, according to the ultimate resources, the fittest guy in the world.
Certain dubious resources.
Right. AKA my best friend now.
Yeah.
Ultra marathoner, extraordinary athlete, and you've built a really fascinating life for yourself. But I want to take a step back because this actually was not your life and was not the way that you were living. In fact, it was pretty close to the opposite. So before you sort of embraced this complete commitment, take me back to what your life was like and what you were doing.
Sure. Well, I guess my life started out quite good. I was an excellent student in high school, loving parents that are still married, and kind of had all of my needs met, and ended up getting into all the colleges I applied to. And I was a swimmer in high school and in college, and had achieved a certain level of proficiency with that. Ended up going to Stanford University, and that's where things kind of started to shift because I discovered the wondrous effects of alcohol, which over the course of the next 15 years sort of led to my personal decline and took me to some pretty dark places. So I had a kind of protracted battle with drug addiction and alcohol that really kind of disconnected me from myself. I mean, not only did I become alienated from my friends and family and unemployable and one step away from homeless, really just disconnected from who I was as a person.
So from there, were the people around you sort of aware of what was going on? Or?
Oh, certainly. My family was very concerned, had been trying to help me, and I had not kind of hit my bottom yet and wasn't ready to accept help. And it got to the point where, my parents were like, we don't want to talk to you anymore. When you're ready to address this problem, you can call us anytime, but until then, we don't want to hear from you. Right. And my boss, I was a senior associate at a big corporate law firm in Los Angeles. And he was ready to fire me. He knew what was going on. Everybody knew what was going on. But, denial is a very powerful human emotion, and exceptionally powerful in an active alcoholic. So it took some time before I was really ready to grapple in a real way with this problem. Of course, I knew I was an alcoholic, but there's a gap between self-knowledge and taking action to address the problem.
Well, I mean, so there was a little bit of a leap too. You go from Stanford to being a lawyer in a large law firm.
Right.
All the while sort of living this kind of almost double life.
Yeah, for sure. Very secretive life. I became very good at lying and deceiving people about what I was really doing, and was able to kind of keep it together for a while. I mean, I was able to graduate from Stanford, and I was able to, by the hair of my chinny chin chin, get into law school. And somehow, to this day, I look back on that experience and wonder how the heck I actually graduated from law school. But somehow I did, and was able to get a job. So I was able to kind of get my life together enough to put up a face that I was a responsible member of society, but kind of pulling the curtain back, if you were to look at kind of how I was actually really conducting myself, it was a very different picture. And so when you're an active drug addict or alcoholic and you're trying to navigate the world, you have to spin a lot of plates to kind of keep the facade up, and it's exhausting, actually.
Yeah, I mean, for you, was the draw, was it something that you were escaping? Was it more of a chemical? Was it genetic? Was it some blend of? Was there something that you were self-medicating for? What was it that drew you into this place?
I asked myself that question a lot, and I don't know that I have the answer. I mean, I know that I'm a drug addict and an alcoholic, and why I'm that way is kind of something I'll probably continue to explore for the rest of my life. Nobody in my immediate family is an alcoholic, so I can't say that I had a genetic predisposition to it. And of course I can say, well, I was depressed about this or whatever, but I don't really find that to be productive. I know that I am, and I know what the solution is for me. You know, I know how I got sober, and I know what I need to do to stay sober. And so sort of pondering the you know, the whys kind of leads me down a rabbit hole that I don't feel necessarily serves me.
Interesting. So you reach a place where you're working at a large law firm, which very often is insane hours also.
Yeah.
High stress.
That didn't help.
Right, because you picked a career which is
Yeah.
like pushes you to the edge. So is there a big moment? Is there like a gradual awakening that happens with you, or was there a moment where?
There was definitely a moment. I think the sort of defining bottom that I had was a marriage that went awry. And I talk about it in my book. It's a long story and kind of too long to get into the details of it for purposes of this interview. But essentially, I had a wedding that did not culminate in a marriage. It ended on the honeymoon, and it was quite a dramatic event in my life. That shocked me to my core, and I think that was my bottom as an alcoholic. But it was such a painful moment for me that I needed to medicate myself with drugs and alcohol for the better part of like the next 9 months before I was ready to kind of deal with it. And then it was just, I woke up one day and I was like, I've had enough. I'm ready to go to rehab. And you know, booked a flight and got a bed at a treatment center in rural Oregon, and you know, just somehow found the wherewithal to board that plane, and that was the first step in changing the trajectory of my life forever.
So you were residential there for a month or something like that?
Actually, well, I showed up thinking I'm just going to spin dry here for a couple weeks and get back to my job. That was my plan.
Right.
And the counselors there, once they, you know, I was able to get to a place where I was able to be honest with them about what I was doing. And they kind of looked at me and said, yeah, you know, I think you might want to stick around a little bit longer. They essentially said, you have your alcoholism is sort of progressed to the point of a 65-year-old man, and we think you should stick around. And I could have said no. Nobody was forcing me to be there, but I ended up staying for 100 days. So I was there for quite a long time, and it really was a process of rewiring my mind, body, and spirit completely, and learning new tools for living.
Yeah. So where do you go from there? Because, I mean, you're licensed, you're skilled, you could go back to this profession and the same pace of life and the same things, but...
Right. Well, I actually did, when I got out of the treatment facility, I did go back to the law firm. My boss had been actually very supportive of this move, and I felt that the right thing to do was to go back, even if I didn't want to, and I knew that life was not right for me, to go back and kind of honor the commitment they made to me by going and working there for at least as long as I had been gone. And so I did that until I reached a point where I realized this was not right for me, and I ended up leaving and starting my own private, like sort of boutique entertainment transactional practice, and pursued that for the next number of years. And really kind of getting out of rehab and embarking on this new life that really was monopolized by recovery and creating a foundation of sobriety, I was able to get back all of those things in my life that I had lost. I was able to repair the relationships with my friends and my family. I was able to show up and be a responsible member of society, to be a worker among workers, to be honest, to look people in the eye, and all of these things that had been challenges for me when I was active in my alcoholism. But the one thing that I did not attend to was my health, my fitness. And you know, I had gained 50 pounds and was very, very unfit by the time I was about 39 years old.
Yeah, which for high stress, a lot of hours attorney, almost no matter where you are. I mean, I've lived that for a much shorter amount of time, and I remember I was a disaster physically, health. I mean, I ended up in the hospital. I was in emergency surgery.
Oh wow, I didn't know.
I was on a deal, and we worked like the better part of 3 weeks without sleeping, and I was in horrible pain for the last few days, and I had a raging infection in the middle of my body that literally ate a hole through my intestine from the outside in.
Goodness.
So we literally hit the button on the deal, and I went to the hospital, and they was wheeled into emergency surgery. But I think so many extreme examples. But I think so many people, not just in law, but I think law is particularly sort of susceptible to people just completely tuning out the visceral signals that their body is giving them.
Absolutely. And well, also there's a culture in that environment that is supportive of that lifestyle, you know, and there's a kind of weird false pride that goes along with that. Like,
right.
What? You're not eating dinner at the law firm? Like, what are you doing?
Right.
You know, are you weak? And you know, I remember one incident at my firm where I was in on a Saturday morning or a Sunday morning quite early, and there was a guy who was on the cusp of being named partner, who was working on a summary judgment motion, and his wife had just given birth like hours prior, and
wow.
he was in the law firm like cranking out this brief when I was like, why aren't you at the hospital with your wife and your baby? He's like, how are you gonna get this done, you know? And that was one in many moments where I thought, yeah, this is not a good long-term plan
not
for
right.
me. Yeah.
So yeah, and like I said, I don't mean to slam law, but it was one of probably a number of professions where, you know, like, because a lot of the clients we worked with, you know, like investment banking, all
Sure.
this, it's built around a culture of, you know, like, if you're not suffering, if you're not feeling the same amount of pain as everybody else around us, if you're not sort of like 100 miles an hour,
Right.
You're not really practicing. Now I remember like one day being in an office, and I think I was leaving around 6 at night or something like that, and somebody walking by and saying, "Oh, half day, huh?"
Yeah, exactly.
It's like, okay, that's how it is. So what do you do about it?
So what happened in my case was on the eve of my 40th birthday, I'd been up late. I got home late from work, and I stayed up late watching television after my family was asleep. And I think I was eating a bag of Jack in the Box cheeseburgers. I had like what you call, a friend of mine calls the window diet. If you can roll down the window and somebody hands it to you, you eat it, and that's kind of how I was subsisting at the time. And you know, it was time to go to bed. Was walking up the stairs, and about halfway up the staircase, like I had to stop. Like I was out of breath. I was buckled over, sweat on my brow, tightness in my chest. And it scared me. I thought that I was on the precipice of having a heart attack, and I thought, you know, I'm 39, like I had to take a break walking up a simple flight of stairs. You know, I need to do something about this. And I think this is kind of where the sobriety story plays into what happened next, because when I made that decision to get sober and get on that airplane and go to that rehab, it was like a little crack in the door. You know, the door cracked open, and I had a choice. Like, you're going to walk through this door, but if you don't do it right away, like if had I just decided I wasn't going to do it that day, I might have never done it. You know, it's sort of that, the preciousness of those little moments of opportunity, and either you're going to act and your life is going to change, or if you don't, like, you may not get that sort of moment again. And so when I had that staircase episode, I was able to recognize that this was once again one of those moments that was important, and I needed to do something right away. And if I just blew it off and, you know, kind of perpetuated my denial about my scenario, you know, I don't know that I would have ever made any change.
Right. So at this point, you have a family, so it's not just you that you're making decisions for, and it's not just you that this would be impacting.
Yeah, absolutely. I have 2 teenage stepsons and 2 daughters, the youngest of which had not been born at this point. But yeah, I was scared for myself, and I was, you know, as the head of a family, it was terrifying. And I have a grandfather, my mother's father, who had been a champion swimmer in college, was captain of the University of Michigan swim team, and an Olympic hopeful, an American record holder, who had remained healthy his whole life and had been you know, a swimmer his whole life, never overweight, never smoked, and died of a heart attack in his early 50s.
Wow.
And died long before I was born, of course. So my mother would always say, you know, you've got to watch out about your health, and heart disease runs in our family. And you know, here was a guy who, in many ways, was my doppelganger. As you know, I was named after him, and he loved swimming like I did.
Wow.
And that kind of, you know, I thought about that a lot in that moment, thinking, you know, if I don't make a change, I'm headed in the same direction as this guy, probably sooner, based upon how I feel right now. And so what I did, the first thing I did, I wish I could tell you I went to the library and got a bunch of books and watched a bunch of documentaries and said, this is how to be healthy. I didn't do that. I wish I had. I would have saved a lot of time. But my wife is a always been much healthier than I. Avid yoga practitioner, into all sorts of, Eastern healing modalities, and that was always kind of like her thing, and if you were to look in our fridge, it was pretty clear, like the food she was eating and the foods I was eating.
Right. Like zoned off with
exactly.
skull and crossbones.
Exactly. And I'm like, that's great for you, honey. I love you, but I'm going to eat this.
Right.
And but I was, I was desperate. And the next day I said, hey, that juice cleanse you did, 6 or 8 months ago, like I think I want to try that. And she looked at me like confused.
Yeah.
Like
who are you?
Like, yeah, like
What'd you do
as
with
if
my
I
husband?
said, the high heels in the closet, I want to wear those today. Like it was
Right.
so out of character for me. It was the last person who would entertain doing something weird like that, like remove toxins. What toxins? I'm a logic-based guy, and I understand science, and I know best. I went to Stanford, and all this sort of thing. But I was in a place where I was ready to suspend my preconceived notions about what I thought was right or my way. And again, that's very similar to a cornerstone principle of recovery. It's sort of being willing to ask for help, being willing to entertain the notion that your way might not be the best way. And so I did that. I did a 7-day fruit and vegetable juice cleanse.
So what was, I'm curious though, so at first your wife's got to be surprised, shocked,
Right.
or, aliens have taken my husband.
Yes.
But was there any tension? Because it's so interesting to me, if you have two people who are in a relationship, who love each other, you're building a family together. But generally if one person is sort of like a real zealot about life, health
Right.
and lifestyle, it's a big part of them. And then if you have one person who's your partner in life, who's the complete opposite, was that something that caused ongoing tension, or was just kind of an accepted thing?
It's a great question, and the answer is interesting. I think for a certain number of years, she would like encourage me, like, hey, you should look at this way, or here's a book you should read, and she'd put books on my book stand, and I wouldn't open them, and I wouldn't read them, and I think that definitely caused her some frustration and consternation. But she's also far more enlightened than I, and she understands a key kind of spiritual principle, which is non-attachment. And she made a decision after sort of pursuing things that way and realizing that I wasn't biting or I wasn't changing, to let go. Like, she said, I love you exactly the way you are. I'm not attached to you changing, and kind of, was resolved to that. And it's when she made that decision to kind of let go and just appreciate me for who I was, that I started to change. It's a very interesting, sort of spiritual equation somewhere in there, of letting go and allowing the person their space. And then, maybe something subconsciously in me was reacting to that. Like, hey, why isn't she pushing me to read all these books anymore? And then it was on me. It came down to personal responsibility. Like, I needed to want it for myself, not because she wanted me to do it.
Yeah, that's big. So you decided to actually say, okay, let's do this. And at that point, did she become attached again?
No, actually, it was like I had to say, let's get the stuff. Like, I'm ready to go. And she was like, yeah. Like, I don't think she believed me.
Right.
It took her. I had to ask her like 3 times before she actually went to the store with me to get the stuff, because she was like, she really was not attached, and maybe she didn't believe that I was serious. I don't know. It's funny how that played out. But yeah, I did it, and the first couple days I remember being buckled over on the couch, and I felt like I was back in rehab, detoxing. And weathering a detox is something I was familiar with. It was sort of, I know how this feels, and I know that it will change. Like, if I can just get through the next couple days, it'll start to shift. And that's what happened.
So it's kind of interesting then, that the fact that you had like, really the detox experience from like drugs and alcohol gave you the understanding of what the process would be, and that you would actually come out the other side. Like, this was actually okay to be in this not great place. Yeah,
there was an extreme amount of discomfort for a couple days, but I was like, okay, I know what. There's almost like, okay, bring it on. I'm ready for this. Like, let me weather this. And it did shift. Day 3, I felt better. Day 4, I started to feel really good. the last couple days of the cleanse, I experienced a resurgence in vitality and energy levels that I couldn't ever remember having. And it was profound, you know. It really hammered home this idea that, that food is medicine indeed, that we do have the power to heal ourselves. And the fact that I could have abused my body for so long with drugs and alcohol and terrible diet, and then in a mere 7 days feel great, is, you know, a testament to the resilience of the human body when you treat it right.
So that becomes a springboard, I guess.
Sure. Yeah, sure. So then, of course, being a good alcoholic, I'm like, well, I'm just going to drink juice for the rest of my life. I'm never going to go back to food. No, but of course you got to start eating again. And I thought, well, what am I going to do now? Like, I feel so good. I want to keep feeling this good. And once again, I wish that I'd gotten a bunch of books on the subject and set myself on a proper trajectory. Again, everything goes back to recovery for me. And in recovery, they teach you that you're either using drugs or you're sober. You're either drinking or you're not. There's a very black and white sort of calculus to the whole thing. And so I think vegetarianism appealed to me from a health perspective because it's black and white. I could wrap my brain around. It's like, you're eating meat or you're not eating meat. Like, I understand that.
Yes.
That's like a language that makes sense to me.
Right.
I can grapple with that. And so I tried a 100% whole food plant-based diet, really thinking this isn't going to work either, but at least I can say I've exploited all of these avenues. And that's where, you know, I experienced literally nothing short of a miracle. I mean, it was, again, within 7 days of making that switch, I felt like I did on the latter days of that juice cleanse. I felt amazing. And that's when I knew I was onto something. And then I began to educate myself. So that was sort of the beginning of my journey towards, you know, returning to athleticism.
Right. And at that point, had you started, I'm assuming when you were sort of like working crazy hours, that exercise wasn't a part of your life?
Right. No, not at all.
So
not at all.
Does the change in food and this whole thing also coincide with you starting to move your body more? Or?
Yeah, absolutely. I don't think that I would have returned to exercising again had I not changed my diet. I mean, the diet comes first. And I had so much energy all of a sudden that I just needed an outlet for it. I was bouncing off the walls. I was literally like, I need to do something with myself. And it wasn't, I had no designs on returning to being a competitive athlete. I wanted to lose my gut, you know, and I wanted to be able to enjoy my children at their energy level. I mean, that was really my aspiration. You know, bought a pair of running shoes. My wife bought me a bike for my 40th birthday, and you know, I started jumping in the pool once in a while and going on a casual bike ride on a Saturday afternoon with some friends. Certainly nothing competitive. It was really just, again, burning off this added energy and reconnecting with a part of myself that I feel like I had lost as a youth. You know, how much I love swimming, how much I love being outdoors and pushing my body.
So it really started as something which was, I mean, it wasn't a concerted effort to compete or become great at something. It was just...
Not at all.
You were vibrating and needed a way to dissipate the energy.
It was like, yeah, I was vibrating. I was taking in a different vibration, and my body was responding to that vibration by directing me on a new path.
Right. So how do you make the jump from just burning off the extra energy that you have to being this extreme athlete in a lot of people's minds? 'Cause that's a pretty huge jump.
Yeah, and it didn't, you know, it seems like it happened overnight. It was over the course of, you know, maybe a year and a half, I suppose. It started, I guess it first started when maybe 4 months or so into this kind of dietary experiment and this, you know, resurgence of kind of feeling my body again. I went out for a morning run. It was a weekday morning. My plan was just to run for 45 minutes or an hour on a local trail. And it was one of those days where everything just felt great. Like anybody who's a runner knows this, or an athlete, and everything just clicks and you feel bulletproof.
You can just go forever.
And you can just go. And that's what I did. I just kept going and going and going until I realized I'd been running almost 2 hours away from my car where I'd parked at the base of this trail. I didn't have any water with me, and I was like, what are you doing? I was like, I feel so good, but like, this is really irresponsible. I could like collapse on this trail in the middle of nowhere. Turned around and ran back and felt, great all the way to the end, and ended up running like almost, the better part of a marathon that morning, like out of the blue, and I thought, what is going on? Either I've unlocked some dormant gene, or this diet is working for me in a way that I could not have imagined, or, I don't know what, but I felt like directed to exploring this part of who I was in a new way. And that kind of led me to thinking about a challenge and, and sort of exploring further that question of how resilient is the human body. And having come from a place of abusing it for so long, what is it capable of now, like at age 42, 43? I wanted to answer that question for myself.
And since you'd already essentially just run a marathon, that
right.
wasn't a big challenge.
Well, it wasn't, and it didn't feel like any big deal. So I thought, well, what if I could do that? Like, what would happen if I actually prepared for something, in a real way, and set my sights on a goal? I thought, well, I can enter this marathon, or maybe I'll do an Ironman, and just nothing really clicked as being super, as giving me that like feeling that of being inspired.
Yeah.
And then I read an article about this race called Ultraman, which I'd never heard of, which is most people know what an Ironman is, but if you don't, an Ironman is a very long triathlon race, which during the course of one day you swim 2.4 miles, you bike 112 miles, and then you run a marathon.
Yeah.
And this Ultraman race is essentially a little bit more than double that. And over the course of 3 days, you circumnavigate the entire big island of Hawaii, which is like roughly the size of Connecticut. It's a big island. And the first day you swim 6.2 miles, and then you ride your bike 90 miles. The second day you ride your bike 170 miles, and the third day you run 52.4 miles, a double marathon.
Wow.
And I was reading this article about this race that I'd never heard of, that apparently had been around for 25 years. There's no media coverage, there's no money, there's no prize money, there's nothing. It's sort of a very grassroots kind of event that is probably what Ironman was like back in 1980 when it started, right? And there was something about that I found really appealing. And in the description of this race, it made it sound like this spiritual odyssey. There are only 35 athletes that are invitation only from all over the world. They're invited to compete in this race. Everybody has to bring their own crew, a vehicle, like a van that drives with each athlete to make sure they get from place to place. And there's this, in Hawaii they call it ohana, it's the spirit of family, where every athlete and their crew is making sure that all the other athletes are tended to, and the idea is that everybody crosses the finish line. And of course it's a race and there's people that want to win, but it was really this kind of core kind of communalism about this race that really captured my imagination. And it was one of those things in life where you see something and a switch flicks and you're like, I'm going in this direction, It made no sense logically that I would be in any position to participate in this event, but there was something inside of me that knew that I was going to be doing that race.
So you just went all in?
I did. I read that article and I couldn't stop thinking about it for a couple days, as crazy as it sounded, and I called up the race director. It was some months before this race was open to receiving applications. I called her up and I said, I just read this article about this race and I'm really interested in it and I want to do it. And she said, well, what have you done?
I just did this really long
other than
run
eating
on a
cheeseburgers
trail.
on the couch for a long time? I was like, I haven't done anything. And she should have said, well, why don't you run a couple marathons or do an Ironman and call me in a year or two and we'll talk. But she didn't say that. What she said was, well, it's interesting that you called and that you're expressing this interest, and there's a little bit of time, and why don't you check in with me in another couple months and we'll see where you're at. In other words,
because it was only 35 people. You said,
only 35 people, and the race has gained considerable popularity over the last couple of years. So at this time, this was prior to the 2008 race. There was a little more flexibility in being accepted to compete.
Right.
But it was another crack in the door, to sort of continue the theme where she gave me a little glimmer of hope. And I grabbed onto that, and I knew that if I took the opportunity seriously and kind of walked through that door, that there was a good chance that I would be able to line up the starting line for that race. And so I proceeded accordingly. You know, I hired a coach and got a training program together and had about 6 or 7 months to get ready for this race, which isn't a lot of time for somebody like me who hadn't been doing very much. Right. Yeah.
I mean, the Ironman alone is something that people train for.
Of course. Of course.
Huge amount. And very often after years of working up to it.
Absolutely.
So to do double that is pretty tremendous.
So
eventually, I'm assuming you call her back and she says...
Yeah, exactly. So I stayed in touch with her and eventually wore her down enough where she said, okay, I'll let you in. You know?
Right.
And I said, thank you, I will not disappoint you. And I trained, you know, really hard because I didn't want to, you know, that meant a lot to me that she showed me, you know, that she showed some faith in me and was taking a leap of faith. And I wanted to honor that by making sure that I was as physically and mentally prepared for that race as I could be in a short period of time.
Right.
Which is tricky because you can't if you ramp up your volume too quickly for something like that in your training, you're going to get injured or overtrained.
Yeah. I mean, which is the flip side. I was thinking, you know, like, because it's so extreme, you know, you get concerned about going the opposite direction of, you know, like, you become now addicted to this other thing, which actually destroys your body, but in a different way.
Right. Yeah, and I get that question a lot. Like, haven't you just transferred all of your, you know, addictive behavior onto this extreme sports template? And you know, it's a valid question. You know, and it's something that I have to soul search over. And I certainly think that you know, the extreme nature of ultra endurance sports is a perfect sort of vehicle for an addict because there's no end to the amount of obsessive, you know, kind of training that you can pour into it. And I have to be careful about that. I mean, I would imagine that that's part of the allure for me. But at the same time, you know, I have so many other things I'm doing in my life, you know, lawyer and husband and father of children. And so for me, you know, balance is the thing that I'm always trying to focus on. Like, how can I pursue this thing that for whatever reason I'm attracted to and still maintain balance in my life? Because if my relationship with my wife gets derailed or I'm not seeing my kids, like, what is the point of all of this? You know, so I always, you know, am always kind of making lists, making sure that my priorities are in check.
It sounds like also to a certain extent, I mean, the level of competition that you're doing it becomes a metaphor for other things.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think that on some level, I believe that, you know, I'm kind of meant to pursue this sport. I certainly have an acuity for it, and I'm a happier person when I'm doing it, and I feel that I'm more fully expressed and actualized when I'm doing it. To the extent that when I'm not training, my wife will say, "Will you please go ride your bike? Like, you're a much better person. I like you more when you're," you know. And yeah, it's a metaphor. Not everyone's going to want to go out and race Ultraman or you know, participate in extreme sports, but for me, I feel it is kind of the manifestation of this journey towards reconnecting with myself and being able to kind of express more fully who I am and be comfortable with that in my own skin.
Yeah, I mean, that's powerful. To find something like that allows you that in your life. I think so many people are looking for it. Like the thing that lets you be so fully expressed that it's just, you know, it's almost like it becomes a part of you, you know.
Yeah. I mean, you know, Henry David Thoreau said, "The mass of men lead lives of quiet desperation," and it was true then, and I think it's just as true, if not more true now. And you know, I relate to that a lot, and I think about that quote a lot, and I certainly lived that life for a long time, and it's been a hard-wrought journey to kind of figure out, you know, how to, you know, some escape path out of that. And I feel very fortunate, and I'm very grateful that I found that. But I'm also very empathetic to people, and in particularly men, who struggle with this because, you know, life is difficult, and you got to put food on the table, and all these sorts of real life issues that we have. Like, I don't have time to figure out what makes me happy because I'm so busy in the day-to-day of my life. But I think that we all have dreams deferred that are locked inside of us, and we all have like a more authentic version of ourselves that's, yearning to come out. And I think, you know, the natural healthy state of man is to be more expressed in that.
That's powerful. I completely agree.
You've done it.
I'm on the road.
Yeah,
you know?
I mean, I wouldn't say I'm the.
Yeah, I mean,
it's
to
a
me,
struggle.
It is. I mean, to me, one of the biggest sort of awakenings is that there is no there. You know, it's kind of like it's just. Yeah, it's funny. Like what people always ask me, because I always ask them, can you live a good life if you don't know, or if you're not at that place, you know, where you feel like, okay, I'm finally living a good life. And one of my big awakenings through a lot of these conversations and just introspection and living and doing things is that it's not a place that you get to. It's a lens that you bring to where you are. And, you know, like the moment you decide, you know, that's what it's about, because there is no place that you get to.
Right.
You know,
it's disappointing to hear that, and yet, you know, but that's the reality. You know, that's the truth.
I mean, it's disappointing, but in a certain way also empowering, because you can be like, you know what, that means that I can actually flip the switch right now, today. I need to figure out, now I need to explore a different set of tools that allow me to figure out, how do I swap a different lens now?
Right. For me, the most powerful tools are practicing gratitude, which is not my natural default state by any means, and it requires a lot of focus on my part and attention in order to get to that place, and being of service. And when I'm in gratitude and when I'm in service, then my life is good. And other people's lives are better too.
Right. Which is kind of like I was going to wrap up saying, yeah, this is a good life project. You know, in your mind, if I asked you, what does it mean to live a good life?
That's part of it. Being in gratitude, being of service, and being connected with yourself in a way that allows you to be fully expressed as your unique self.
I like that.
Yeah.
So enjoyed getting to know a lot more about you and your journey, and thank you for the conversation.
Yeah, thanks for having me. It's great to be here.
Yeah, my pleasure. So
cool.
And I'm Jonathan Fields. My guest today has been Rich Roll, signing off for A Good Life Project.